Welcome to the UCD Writing Centre workshop on the how and why of academic referencing. So we're going to do three things today. We're going to start by looking at some common concerns that students have about referencing. Secondly, we're going to answer the question, why do we reference? And thirdly, we're going to look at how do we reference. So this particular workshop is going to look at the Harvard referencing style. Now, some of you may be using other referencing styles, but Harvard is by far the most commonly used one in UCD, so that's why we're focusing on that one. However, especially parts 1 and 2 are relevant to every referencing system that you use. So even if Harvard isn't the primary referencing system that you use, you'll get something out of this workshop nonetheless. Before we begin, I'd like you to do two things. Firstly, I'd like you to have a Word document open so you have somewhere to complete the tasks that I've set throughout the workshop. And secondly, I want you to download a copy of the UCD Library How to Cite and Reference Using the Harvard Style. It's a PDF document that you'll find on the website link that I've posted on this slide, and it's down the left-hand side of the screen under Harvard Style printable version. We'll be referring to this as we go through the workshop. Questions about referencing are one of the most common queries we have in the UCD Writing Centre, so we're going to begin by looking at some of the common concerns that students have about referencing. Okay, so your first task in this workshop is to open your Word document and answer the question, what are your concerns about referencing? So have a think about what motivated you to sign up for a referencing workshop, what are the things that you're unclear about, and hopefully as we go through, those concerns will be addressed. You might want to pause the workshop here while you do that, and when you're finished, come back and proceed on to the next slide. We often have students coming into the UCD Writing Centre with referencing concerns. So the first thing to remember is that you're not alone if you find referencing a bit challenging or a little bit stressful. So some of the common concerns that students express to us is along the lines of, I don't understand the rules of referencing, I don't understand the terminology. There's often quite a lot of anxiety or stress around the issue of plagiarism, so have I referenced enough? Am I referencing correctly? Often there's a little bit of confusion around what referencing styles are and what the conventions of different referencing styles are. Sometimes lecturers have different expectations regarding to referencing, which again can cause a little bit of anxiety and confusion. There's no avoiding the fact that referencing is a boring and tedious subject, so students are sometimes disinclined to spend time on it. And finally, often students don't understand why it's so important to reference, not just so that you avoid accusations of plagiarism, but also so you can improve the quality of your work. So the purpose of this workshop is to try and address some of these common concerns, and we're going to start with, why do we reference? If we were in a physical classroom today, I'd ask all of you, why do we reference? And chances are one of the first answers I get is that we reference to avoid plagiarism, which is true. However, there are a variety of other reasons why it's important to reference. First among them is that it allows us to respect and acknowledge other people's work when we use it in our own work. Secondly, to avoid plagiarism. Thirdly, it can help us provide evidence for the claims that we're making in our work, which helps to give credibility to the arguments and claims that we're making. And finally, it lets others look up and read the sources that we've used in order to prepare assignments. So the short answer to the question, why do we reference, is academic integrity. As members of the research community, which you are as students within the university, you have a professional duty to acknowledge the use of the intellectual labours of others. By failing to acknowledge the use of the ideas and work of others, you are in fact committing intellectual theft, which is why the university takes this issue so seriously. But moreover, by failing to acknowledge the use of the ideas and work of others, you're also burying what's original in your own work. So part of why it's important to reference correctly is so that your ideas and the ideas of others can be separate and your intellectual voice and your academic insight can shine through. So another important reason for why we reference is that it allows you to show your work. Accurate citations and bibliographic detail allow your reader to locate your sources if they want to read them more fully. It allows them to place the ideas you've used in the broader context of that particular author's work. And finally, it potentially also allows your reader to learn from your work. So another reason why we reference is that it forms a record of our learning. Often when I get essays in to grade myself, one of the first things that I do is I look at the bibliographies or the reference lists at the end of the essay, because it very quickly tells me a couple of things. Firstly, it shows me what are the academic debates or conversations that the paper will be speaking to. Secondly, what's the depth and breadth of the knowledge that the student has in relation to this particular topic. A short reference list probably indicates that there hasn't been a huge amount of reading done in the preparation of this particular essay. And then it also thirdly allows me to have a very quick overview of what's the quality of evidence that has been used to support the claims within the essay. So if I see a reference list full of peer-reviewed academic articles or academic books, I'd probably be more confident about the quality of evidence that's being used within the paper than if it was a reference list full of nothing but YouTube clips and Wikipedia entries. And in fact, looking at your referencing list yourself as you prepare your essay and as you write up your assignments, rather than leaving referencing to the end where it's a scramble to get all the bits and pieces together so that you're not plagiarizing and that your referencing is correct, if you pay attention to referencing as you go through, you can keep an eye on what's the quality of evidence that I have for this particular claim, how do I know and how do I show what I know to my readers I'm going through. So if we stand back a little bit and think about what are the components of an academic paper, we can kind of break it down into three things. So we have knowledge first, or what's our knowledge base, what's our understanding of that knowledge, and what's our analysis of that knowledge. And each different component feeds into each other. So our knowledge informs our understanding forms our analysis, and our analysis feeds back into our knowledge. But crucial to all of this is the sources that we're using in order to build our knowledge. And so what we want as much as possible to be using high quality peer-reviewed academic sources in order to prepare our essays. And as I said, by focusing on referencing, by paying attention to referencing, we can keep an eye on what are the kinds of sources that I'm using in preparation for my assignments. So paying attention to referencing can help us focus down on the quality of sources that we're using in the preparation of our assignments. And I've said several times that we should be using high quality, reliable sources. So what is different about academic work to other forms of knowledge? So academic scholarship is evidence-based and the result of a rigorous review and is held to high methodological standards. And because the quality of your sources strongly determines the quality of your understanding and analysis, you really want to be using the highest quality, reliable sources that you can. And as I said before, paying attention to the quality of your sources is also paying attention to the quality of your work. So given that the quality of our sources is so central to the quality of our work, what are some examples of high quality scientific sources that we can use? Firstly, there is peer-reviewed academic journals, peer-reviewed books by academic publishers, peer-reviewed edited volumes, academic databases, websites, and generally speaking, sources found in academic libraries. Now, the kind of sources that are considered high-quality scientific sources will differ slightly from discipline to discipline. And on the UCD Library website, there is a subject guide for every topic that is available to study in UCD, highlighting where you can find high quality scientific sources in order to prepare your assignments, in order to do research. So I suggest that if you haven't already looked at these, that you look at them in relation to your own discipline and your own topics. On the other side of the coin then, what are some examples of low quality non-scientific sources? So again, there will be little differences between disciplines, so you should always be guided by what your module coordinator is and what the norm in your disciplines are. But generally speaking, you are less you can be less confident about the quality of knowledge that you'll find on most websites, on revision aids like Spark Notes, on open source knowledge bases like Wikipedia or YouTube, some news agencies, blogs. Generally the first hit that's returned by Google, for example. And the reason for this is that you can't depend on the process through which that knowledge has been produced. In academic sources, as I said, papers, books, articles will have been subject to a rigorous review process and will be evidence-based and held to high methodological standards. That's not the case with non-academic sources, so it's something to bear in mind. Okay, so to quickly recap, why do we reference? Firstly, it helps you to focus your attention on the quality of the sources that you use as you write your assignments. It can help you to provide reliable evidence for the points, claims, arguments that you make in your assignments. It can help you to demonstrate the depth and breadth of your knowledge and understanding with respect to a particular topic. By referencing correctly, you're presenting yourself as a serious scholar. And finally, it is meeting your professional duty to avoid plagiarism and to acknowledge the use of the ideas and work of others. Now that we understand why it's important to reference and why it's important to pay attention to the quality of our sources, we're going to move into the question of how to reference. We're going to do a couple of things before we get to examples of the Harvard referencing system. First, we're going to look at some referencing terminology so we're all on the same page. And then we're going to look at some of the information that we need to collect before we can start accurately referencing. And then we'll move on to examples and exercises for you to practice so that you can use the Harvard system yourself. So the first thing you need to have clear in your head is what is a referencing style. And so a referencing style is a set of rules and conventions with respect to citations, reference lists, and the particular format of bibliographic information that's preferred by different academic disciplines. So Harvard is an example of a referencing style, but there are others like Chicago, Vancouver, MLA, APA. So the first thing you need to know to reference correctly is what referencing style you're being asked to use. So one of the things that distinguish different referencing systems or styles is whether or not they use in-text citations or footnotes. So it's important to know the difference. An in-text citation is brief referencing information that appears in the body of your text, between brackets. Whereas a footnote is text that appears at the bottom of a printed page containing bibliographic information relevant to the point that you've just made. And the footnote and the text is linked by numbers. Citations then are supported by reference lists, works cited, or endnotes, which is a list that appears at the end of your paper containing the full bibliographic information of all of the sources you cited in your paper. And these are arranged alphabetically by author's surname. A bibliography, on the other hand, is a list at the end of your paper containing the full bibliographic information of all the sources that you consulted while preparing your paper. So as I said, the main distinction between different referencing styles is whether or not they use footnotes or in-text citations. So Harvard, APA and MLA styles all use in-text citation, which is then linked to a reference list at the end of the paper, whereas Chicago and Vancouver styles use footnotes or endnotes and a reference list at the end of the paper. So how do you know what referencing style to use for what school? The UCD Library has a wealth of resources available on its website to help you with referencing, academic integrity and evaluating sources more generally, but it also has a list of all of the referencing styles required by each different school. It has detailed guides on how to use each style and a downloadable PDF guide on the requirements of each style, which are available at the website link that I've posted on this slide. So we're going to move into talking about Harvard now, but if you are required to use a different style, this is where you can get information on how to do that correctly. So you might want to pause the presentation here again and go and find out what referencing style your school uses if you don't already know. And then go and download and save the relevant style guide so that it's close to hand when you're completing your assignments. Referencing is a boring and tedious thing that you just have to learn, and the best way to learn it is just to have that document open, regardless of what referencing style you're using, and refer to it often as you're preparing your essays. And very quickly it will become second nature to you and not such a laborious task. So by now we've figured out what referencing style we need to use. The next question is, when should I reference? And there are a couple of situations in which it's necessary to provide citations and bibliographic information. So if you're using direct quotes from your sources, if you're paraphrasing from your sources, when you're referring to ideas or arguments put forward in texts that you're reading, if you're using data, including tables, graphs, databases, etc., that have been compiled and composed by other people, you need to reference. So whenever you're drawing on the intellectual labour of someone else, you need to acknowledge that labour and insert a citation. So the next question, which follows on from when I should reference, is how much should I reference? And commonly we have students come into the Writing Centre and they might say to us, I've done a 2,000 word essay and I have 10 citations. Is that sufficient? And it's a very difficult question to answer in that way. There's a little bit of an art to understanding when you have referenced enough. So rather than asking yourself, how much should I reference? I suggest that you ask a different set of questions. So rather than asking the question, how many references should I have in any given essay, I suggest that you look at your assessment criteria and ask yourself the following. Are my sources reliable and of a high quality? Have I supplied enough evidence to support the claims that I'm making? Have I acknowledged every instance where I've used the work or ideas of others? And am I favouring quality of sources over quantity of references? And if you can answer yes to these questions, then chances are you have adequately referenced your essay. If you're answering no to these questions, then chances are it would be a good idea to go back and look again. Can you find more evidence for what you're doing? Are you sure that you've acknowledged every instance where you've used the work of others? Okay, so we found out what referencing style we need to use. We have thought about when we should reference and how often we should reference, and the final bit that we need to bear in mind before we look at the nuts and bolts of how to reference using the Harvard referencing style is what information in particular do I need to record from my sources when I'm preparing my essays. Now again, this will differ from reference style to reference style, which is why it's important you are clear in your head about what referencing style you're being required to use. But it also differs between sources. So the kind of information you need to record for a journal article will be different to that which you need to record for a book or an edited volume, a report or a website. But generally speaking, you'll need to record the author, the year of publication, the title, place of publication, publisher, and often also the page numbers of where you're taking your information from. So given that you're being asked to provide quite a lot of bibliographic information in order to reference correctly, it's a good idea to get into the habit of recording the full bibliographic information of whatever you're reading in order to prepare your essays. So what I do myself when I'm preparing papers or essays, or if I'm reading or studying in any way, is I write down the full bibliographic information at the top of the page for whatever I'm reading. So in this example, it's a journal article, so I have the author, the year, the title of the article, the title of the journal, the issue number, the volume number, and the page range. And as I'm going through, if there's anything that I think is particularly relevant, I write down the page number in which I found that piece of information and I make my notes alongside the page number. Your brain will try and tell you that you don't need to record this level of detail because you'll remember, but I'm telling you, you won't. And by getting into the habit of keeping good records, good notes of the bibliographic information of your sources, you'll save yourself time when it comes to preparing the final draft. Okay, so we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts now of the Harvard referencing style. As I said previously, the Harvard referencing style uses in-text citations and a reference list. So an in-text citation is where you briefly describe your reference in the body of your text in the format of author, year, page number. And a reference list is a list at the end of your paper which contains all the relevant bibliographic information for the sources cited in your paper. In order to be using Harvard correctly, you need both of these parts to be present in your essay. And that's really important. So one without the other makes no sense. The Harvard referencing system uses in-text citations and a reference list, so it's important that you pay attention to both. Okay, so we're going to go through a few examples of how to correctly use the Harvard system in terms of in-text citations and reference lists. And we're going to start with books. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, we have an example of a single authored book, Writing Security by David Campbell. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we have an edited volume called Critical Approaches to Security. An edited volume is a collection of papers, a collection of chapters written by experts in a particular field that's put together by a particular editor, a particular academic. And so even though both of these sources are books, there's different requirements for each. So we're going to go through them. Okay, so here we have two examples of in-text citations. The first comes from Critical Approaches to Security and from a chapter written by Anthony Burke. So an in-text citation looks like this. Such a theoretical approach conceptualizes security as a performative act. That is, something that is always in the process of being enacted rather than something that just is. And because I'm drawing directly from a quote from the book, I have to cite that, so I put my citation at the end of that direct quote. Burke 2013 and the page number, page 78. The second example of an in-text citation, Campbell, open brackets, 1998, page 201, makes a similar but stronger point, arguing that security is first and foremost a performative discourse constitutive of political order. Now you'll notice that in both cases I'm using a direct quote from my sources, but the in-text citation looks a little bit different, and that comes down to how I'm introducing the direct quote. So in the second example, Campbell, the author, forms part of the sentence, whereas in the first example I'm not really directly referring to the author at all, which is why it's at the end of the sentence in brackets. Either way of doing an in-text citation is correct. It's just a question of how you want to introduce the idea. So we'll go through some more examples. So where it matters whether or not a book is a single authored volume or an edited volume is in the reference list. So if you go back 2 slides, you'll notice that the author of Critical Approaches to Security is Laura Shepherd. But the chapter that I'm referring to is written by a guy called Anthony Burke. So it's the author of the chapter that I referred to first in my reference list. So we see Burke, surname Burke, year of publication, the title of the chapter, where that chapter is in terms of what book it's in, the place of publication, the publisher, and the page range of the chapter. With a single authored volume, there's less information to give, so there's less information required. So it's just the name of the author, surname of the author first, Campbell D, the year of publication, the title of the publication, place of publication, and the publisher. Okay, time for your third task. I want you to provide an in-text citation and reference list entry for this source, which is a single authored book. I suggest you pause the presentation here to complete the task and come back then and move on to the next slide for the answers. If you haven't done so already, I want you to go to the UCD Library website and download the Harvard Referencing Style Guide, which will help you with the formatting of the in-text citation and the reference list entry for this kind of source. So as I mentioned previously, there are 2 ways that you can write an in-text citation. The first is to make the author part of the sentence, or the second is to make a statement and put the citation at the end of the sentence. So the first example here, we're making the author part of the sentence. So we're saying, Buduk, we open brackets and put in the year of publication, argues that, Or alternatively, we could say the politics of fear and right-wing populist discourses have been examined together, which is a claim that Puthoff makes. And so we open brackets and put in the author, comma, year of publication. You'll see then in the reference list there's much more information. So we have the author, year of publication, plus the full title of the book, the place of publication, and the publisher. Now, the keen-eyed among you will also have noticed that there is different formatting requirements for different parts of the reference list. So the title, for example, here is in italics. Again, there's no shortcut to learning how, what are the requirements for, in terms of formatting for different parts of your reference list entry, which is why, and I'm repeating myself now, it's important to download that referencing style guide that's available to you through the library, and constantly refer to it as you are putting together your reference lists and as you're inputting your in-text citations into your papers. The second example we're going to look at is journal articles, so how to cite and reference journal articles correctly. Journal articles require different information for your reference lists because it's a different form of publication to books or edited volumes. And we're also going to look at how to treat publications that have more than one author in the Harvard referencing style. Okay, so example number 1. Jackson, open brackets, 2012, page 15, argued that counterterrorism studies often ignores insights from other disciplines such as sociology and peace and conflict studies. Moreover, the effectiveness of various counterterrorism strategies are far from clear. Open brackets, Lum, Kennedy and Shirley, 2006, page 590. So in this example, we have a single authored article and an article that is written by 3 separate people. And in the second example, we have an article that was written by more than 3 people. And so the in-text citation looks like this. Nonetheless, Shore et al., open brackets, 2018, page 342, close brackets, have shown that civil liberties continue to be affected by these policies. So again, we have an example of the 2 different forms that in-text citation can come in. But what I want you to note is that when we have more than 3 authors in relation to a particular text, rather than writing them all out, which becomes a little bit laborious, we use this shorthand, which is in example 2. Shore et al., meaning Shore and others wrote this paper. And then include, as normal, the year of publication plus the page number. Now, we can use shorthand like Shore et al., etc., because in-text citations within the Harvard referencing style is really just brief shorthand indications that we got this idea or this piece of information from a particular author. And so you link up the in-text citation with the reference list. And in the reference list, we have the whole host of bibliographic information that's required. So in terms of a single authored article, we have the name of the author, year of publication, the title of the article in inverted commas, the title of the journal in italics, the volume number, the issue number, and the page range of that article. So there's a lot more information required from journal articles than there are from books, for example. Again then, when it comes to an example of multiple authored articles, it's the same information is required. So authors, year of publication, title of the article, title of the journal, volume, issue number, and page range. And in our final example then, where before we had in our in-text citation Shore et al., here in the reference list we have all of the authors listed. And you can see that had we included all of that into the body of the text, into our in-text citation, it would have interrupted the flow of the text. So that's why we use this shorthand for multiple authored in-text citations. Okay, task number 4. So again, you might want to pause the presentation here, complete the task and come back for the answer, which is on the following slide. So what I wanted to do here is to again provide an in-text citation and reference list entry for this source. Now this is a journal article And we know that by virtue of a few key pieces of information. So along the top of the picture here, we have the title of the journal, followed by the volume number, number 7, the issue number, number 1, and the page range, 112 to 130. So this is the kind of information that we need in order to correctly cite a journal article. So again, refer to the UCD Library website for the Harvard Referencing Style Guide and complete the task of writing an in-text citation and a reference list entry. So here again, we have an example of the 2 different forms of in-text citations that are available to you, and also the full bibliographic information that should be in your reference list. And again, pay attention to the formatting issues or differences that exist within a reference list entry for your journal article. So we have the journal article title itself in inverted commas and the title of the journal in italics. Again, the more you pay attention to this, the more you practice it, that information will become second knowledge to you. Okay, task number 5. Again, pause the presentation and complete the task and come back then to find the answers on the following slide. So I want you to provide an in-text citation and reference list entry for this source, which is a multi-authored journal article. So again, we can see both forms of the in-text citation. The first in which we're making the author is an active part of the sentence. So Blakely and Raphael, 2016, in brackets, argue that, ... Or the second form, which is the role of torture in the British War on Terrorism has been examined, open brackets, Blakely and Raphael, comma, year of publication, close brackets. And in the reference list again, we see both authors listed, year of publication, the title of the journal article in inverted commas, the title of the journal itself in italics, followed by the volume number, the issue number, and the page range of the particular article. So it's important that you pay attention to the different kinds of information that's required from different sources so that your reader has all the information that they need in order to locate that source should they go looking for it themselves. Task number 6. Again, pause the presentation and have a go at this. So I want you to, using the Harvard referencing style, how would you write an in-text citation and a reference list entry for this quote? The quote is taken from page 57 of a book called The Idea of Human Rights, written by Charles Bitts and published by Oxford University Press in Oxford in 2009. Okay, so once again we can see the 2 forms of in-text citation, the first in which the author forms an active part of the sentence and the second in which they don't. Both forms are acceptable. It's really a question of how you want to introduce the quote into your work. And then secondly, again, in the reference list entry, we see author, year of publication, the title of the book, place of publication, and publisher. So these exercises are repetitive, but it does demonstrate that really there is a lot of repetition to correct citation and referencing, and the more you do it, again, as I said, the more second nature it will become. Okay, so let's practice this again. So, sticking with the idea of human rights, let's imagine that you're writing a paper on human rights and you come across this quote. There are a number of reasons why Bolivians might distrust the transnational discourse of human rights. Now this quote comes from a chapter in an edited volume. The chapter was written by Daniel M. Goldstein. It starts on page 49 and it finishes on page 77. This quote was taken from page 62 and the book itself is called The Practice of Human Rights, edited by Mark Goodale and Sally Mary. So given the information that's on this slide, how would you write an in-text citation and how would you write a reference list entry for this particular quote? And again, the answer is on the next slide, but I encourage you to test yourself first by using the UCD Library Harvard Referencing Style Guide and then check your answers once you've made an attempt at the answer. Okay, so the example in this task was from an edited volume. So for an edited volume, for the in-text citation, we use the author of the chapter itself, not the editors of the volume overall. So our in-text citation would read, Goldstein, open brackets 2007, page 62, shows that there are several reasons why Bolivians may distrust the discourse on transnational human rights. Or we could write it in the other form, where the reference comes at the end of the indirect quote or direct quote that we're borrowing from the book. And then in our reference list, we have all of the information that's required so that our reader, if they choose to, can go and locate this source where it is. So we have the author of the chapter, Goldstein, the title of the chapter, Human Rights as Culprit, Human Rights as Victim, in Goodale M. and Mary S. editors, The Practice of Human Rights, Tracking Law Between the Global and the Local. And again, the title of the book is in italics. So again, just paying attention to the formatting requirements of different parts of the bibliographic information that's required of each source. We're coming to the end of the workshop, so as a way of recapping on what we've learnt, I want you to go through the following statements and see which are true or false. Again, the answers are on the following slide. Here we go. Statement number 1. Citing and referencing are optional in academic work. I hope all of you marked that false, because as we know, it's an essential part of the professional practice of scholarship. Statement number 2. There is more than one referencing style and they all have different rules and formatting conventions. True. If I use Harvard, I have to use in-text citations and referencing lists. Also true. Statement number 4. Citations and referencing can provide evidence for the claims I make in my work. This is true. Number 5. I'll remember where I read a quote. I don't need to take careful notes. That's false. Your brain might tell you that it's true, but I can tell you from experience that it's false. Number 6. I have to provide page numbers in my reference list if I'm citing a journal article. True. Number 7. If a source has 3 authors, I have to list them all in my in-text citation. True. Whether I'm paraphrasing or using a direct quote, I should provide a page number in my in-text citation. This is true. Number 9. A bibliography is a list of all the works I consulted in preparing my assignment. This is true. And number 10, a reference list is a list of all the works I cited in my text, which is also true. And finally, the last task, which of the following resources are available to you in the library? As I said before, the library is an amazing resource for information on how to cite correctly, how to use different referencing styles, and how to go about evaluating the quality of different sources that you're using. So which of these are available to you in the library? And the good news is that all of those resources are available to you through the library website. So the library website is a good place to start if you have any questions about referencing. The other place where you can come and ask questions about referencing or about any other part of writing up your assignments is the UCD Writing Centre, and we are open and will remain open until the end of the semester from Monday to Friday. We've moved all our appointments online to online consultations, and you can make an appointment at the website that's listed here in this slide, or if you have any issues, email us at writing.centre@ucd.ie. Thanks very much.